America is entering one of the most unstable political moments in modern history. Gas prices are rising again. Trump's approval numbers are collapsing. Republicans are quietly turning against him. And behind closed doors, panic is spreading through Washington. What started as a foreign policy gamble with Iran is now turning into a full political crisis at home. Trump expected a quick victory that would make him look strong before the 2026 election cycle. Instead, oil markets exploded, the Strait of Hormuz became unstable, and Americans are now paying the price at gas stations, grocery stores, and shipping costs across the country. At the same time, immigration protests are erupting. ICE detention centers are under fire, and disturbing allegations about abuse, overcrowding, and government overreach are spreading nationwide. Even members of Congress are now directly clashing with federal agents. But the biggest story may be this: Trump's image as an unbeatable strongman is starting to crack. And once that image breaks, everything changes in American politics. This is no longer just Democrats versus Republicans. This is becoming a battle over the future direction of the United States itself. One of the biggest questions Americans are now asking is simple: who is really benefiting from Trump's presidency in 2026? That question exploded again after reports surfaced about the massive UFC event planned directly in front of the White House for Trump's 80th birthday. Officially, the tickets are free, but insiders say major donors are being offered exclusive sponsorship packages reportedly starting around $1 million. In return, donors receive premium access, ringside seating, and most importantly, direct access to Trump himself. Critics say the event looks less like a patriotic celebration and more like a loyalty marketplace built around presidential influence. But while headlines focus on spectacle, something much bigger is happening underneath the surface. Trump's political grip appears weaker than at any point since returning to office. A major warning sign came from South Carolina, where Republican lawmakers reportedly refused aggressive redistricting efforts despite pressure from Trump allies. Why? Because many Republicans now fear a massive anti-Trump voter turnout in 2026. Even deeply conservative districts are becoming politically unstable as economic frustration spreads across the country, and the economy is becoming Trump's biggest problem. His approval numbers on economic management have reportedly fallen into the low 30-seconds. That is devastating for a president who built his entire political comeback around the idea that he alone could restore prosperity and stability. Americans are now facing rising fuel costs, higher transportation prices, and increasing costs on everyday goods. Much of this pressure intensified after the escalating conflict involving Iran. According to growing criticism from both analysts and former officials, Trump expected a fast and controlled operation that would strengthen American leverage in the Middle East. Instead, the situation spiraled into long-term instability. Iran maintained control structures, continued applying pressure around the Strait of Hormuz, and global energy markets reacted immediately. That matters because the Strait of Hormuz remains one of the world's most critical oil shipping routes. Even the threat of disruption can trigger major spikes in fuel and diesel prices worldwide. And diesel prices hit Americans especially hard because nearly every product delivered across the country depends on trucking infrastructure. So while political messaging in Washington tries to project strength, ordinary Americans are seeing something very different in their daily lives: higher costs, economic uncertainty, and growing fear about where the country is heading. At the same time, Trump continues trying to project the image of dominance that has always fueled his political identity. Social media feeds connected to MAGA circles constantly push carefully crafted images portraying him as younger, stronger, healthier, and fully in control. But critics argue the reality now looks very different. Public appearances have raised new concerns about Trump's health and stamina. Questions intensified after another visit to Walter Reed Medical Center, even as White House officials insisted he received a perfect bill of health. Supporters dismissed the speculation immediately, but opponents argue the administration's aggressive messaging only fueled more public curiosity. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Congress itself appears increasingly dysfunctional. Reports indicate House leadership avoided allowing votes that could embarrass Trump over foreign policy decisions involving Iran. Instead of open debate, lawmakers were reportedly sent home early before key resolutions could move forward. For many Americans, that raised serious questions about whether elected officials are serving voters or protecting political power structures. Another growing issue is the stock market itself. While Wall Street continues posting strength, many economists and analysts warn that the gains are heavily concentrated in tech and artificial intelligence investments. Critics argue this may resemble a speculative bubble disconnected from the financial reality facing ordinary working Americans. Because outside the stock market, millions of families are dealing with rising housing costs, expensive groceries, debt pressure, and uncertainty about future employment. The disconnect between Wall Street optimism and Main Street anxiety is becoming harder to ignore. And all of this is happening while Trump faces increasing pressure, not only from Democrats, but from independents, moderates, and even Republicans who fear the political damage building beneath the surface. While the Iran crisis continues dominating headlines, another political firestorm is growing inside the United States itself: immigration and the expanding power of ICE detention systems. Over the past several days, national attention shifted toward reports coming out of Delaney Hall, a controversial detention facility in New Jersey operated through a billion-dollar private prison contract. According to detainees and lawmakers who later visited the site, conditions inside the facility became so severe that hundreds of detainees launched a hunger strike, demanding medical care, legal access, and humane treatment. Letters reportedly sent from inside the facility described overcrowding, lack of health care, poor food quality, and long delays in immigration hearings. Some detainees claimed pregnant women were not receiving proper medical support. Others said families had been separated for months while cases stalled inside an overwhelmed legal system. At first, the story received little national coverage, but that changed once protesters gathered outside the facility and Democratic lawmakers arrived demanding oversight access. Among them was Senator Andy Kim of New Jersey, who later stated publicly that many of the detainees' complaints appeared credible after visiting the facility himself. According to reports, tensions escalated rapidly after ICE officials attempted to transfer one detainee away from the center while protesters blocked vehicles from leaving. Then the situation exploded politically. Federal agents reportedly used pepper spray and crowd control weapons during confrontations outside the facility. Video footage circulating online appeared to show chaos between protesters, lawmakers, and federal officers. Critics claim even a sitting U.S. senator was caught in the confrontation. The Department of Homeland Security defended its actions, accusing protesters of interfering with law enforcement operations and spreading misinformation about conditions inside detention centers. But for many Americans, the images intensified fears that the country is moving toward a far more aggressive immigration system than most voters originally expected. And the financial side of this debate is becoming impossible to ignore. Billions of taxpayer dollars are now flowing into detention expansion, border enforcement, and private prison contracts at the same time many Americans are struggling with inflation, fuel prices, and rising living costs. Critics argue the administration is pouring enormous resources into enforcement infrastructure while ordinary citizens face economic pressure at home. This is where the Iran issue and immigration issue begin colliding politically. The public is watching massive spending on foreign conflict, deportation systems, and detention facilities, while everyday economic anxiety keeps rising. That combination creates dangerous political conditions for any administration, especially one already facing declining approval numbers. Meanwhile, the administration has also taken steps that critics say could make legal immigration far more difficult. New restrictions involving green card processing have triggered concerns among immigrant communities and legal advocates, particularly regarding applicants already living and working inside the United States. Another major legal battle erupted after a federal judge dismissed criminal charges against a deported migrant whose case had become nationally controversial. The judge reportedly criticized the prosecution as politically motivated, while federal officials immediately attacked the ruling and promised continued action. All of this is feeding a larger narrative now spreading across American politics, the belief that the federal government is becoming increasingly aggressive, centralized, and confrontational under pressure. At the same time, Trump's allies are doubling down on election-related policies ahead of 2026. Redistricting fights, voting law battles, and debates over election access are intensifying in multiple states. Critics warn that both parties are preparing for a brutal political war over turnout, ballot access, and control of key swing regions. And underneath everything sits one enormous question. Has Trump already reached the peak of his political power? For years, Trump's greatest weapon was perception. Supporters viewed him as unstoppable, dominant, and politically invincible. But once voters begin sensing weakness, political momentum can shift extremely fast in America. Now, even some conservatives privately worry that the combination of economic pressure, foreign policy instability, legal controversies, and immigration backlash may be creating conditions that could reshape the entire 2026 election landscape. The White House continues projecting confidence publicly. But beneath the surface, Washington increasingly looks like a system under enormous strain. Despite the chaos, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. America is entering a defining political crossroads. Supporters of Trump argue that he is fighting entrenched systems, protecting borders, and reasserting American power on the world stage. But critics see something very different unfolding. They see rising economic pressure, expanding government force, political division, and growing instability, both overseas and at home. What makes this moment so important is that the political battle is no longer limited to Washington elites. It is now moving directly into state governments, local elections, court systems, school boards, and communities across the country. The fight over redistricting, voting laws, immigration enforcement, and executive power is becoming the real battlefield leading into 2026. And that is why both sides are escalating so aggressively. If Trump's movement believed victory was already guaranteed, there would be no need for emergency messaging, constant political attacks, or nonstop efforts to reshape election systems before voters head to the polls. At the same time, opposition movements are growing more energized as economic frustration spreads nationwide. The next election will not magically solve every crisis facing the country. America's political divisions now run far deeper than one presidency or one political party. But 2026 could determine whether the country moves towards stronger democratic institutions or toward an era of permanent political warfare. For millions of Americans, this no longer feels like normal politics. It feels like the future direction of the United States is being decided in real time, and the outcome may shape the country for decades to come.